Okay, we are here. Someone say something to see if you guys are audible. Yes. Hello. Okay.
Something.
I think that's about right. I believe that is good. All right. Quick check here, chat. Let me know. Can you guys hear everyone? Everything's sounding pretty good. Approximately right. Let me know if that's the case, and then we can get started there as well. Like, we're a professional. Okay, they have been audible. Okay, I like that. Good
Perfect.
news. It is all working.
We're there.
I love to see it.
We did it.
We are here. We are here. Okay then, so welcome one and all to a very special edition of the Tea Time podcast, or whatever this is. ArenaNet has taken over. It's now ArenaNet time, not Tea Time anymore. As we can see, we have two wonderful faces in the top half of the screen, Grouch and Ray as well from ArenaNet, here to tell us a little bit more about world restructuring and alliances. And yeah, Roy's here as well, but don't mind him. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show. And without further ado, obviously there are tight schedules here. Let's leap right into this. And so we're here to talk about some upcoming systemic changes to the World versus World game mode, a cornerstone game mode, if you will. And, okay, just in case people aren't really sure what that is, okay, Grouch, could you give us a quick overview of what world restructuring is, what alliances are, and what that means for World versus World in a general context?
Absolutely. I was informed about 2 minutes ago that I would need to give the preamble to the whole stream, so we're going to work through this together. We're going to figure this out together. And Ray, if you hear anything that I've left out, please feel free to jump in. So, World vs. World is a competitive game mode, and all competitive game modes require, a high level of gameplay balance to feel competitive, right? And population imbalance is something that we've been, facing with the game for pretty much as long as it's been around. It doesn't feel good to be, going against forces that are 3, 4, 5 times your size, just because that server doesn't have the volume of players that it needs. And so, largely the reason we're in this situation is because right now we use Worlds and the World linking system to try to balance matches as much as we can. But there's not a lot of granularity there. It doesn't really allow us to reshuffle things in a meaningful way to try to balance out these matches. And so what World Restructuring is going to do is it's going to rely more on guilds and alliances. And alliances are effectively a collection of guilds to create teams. And so we'll basically throw everyone into a big pile, and then we'll try to rearrange them into teams based on the activity level of those players and the number of players that are actually in those groups as well. So hopefully provide a much more even kill experience across all the servers for us. And the benefit of the system is that we can reshuffle this really as frequently as we'd like. And so, initially we might reshuffle things on a weekly basis, and eventually we'll kind of narrow down the right cadence for this, which could be up to 8 weeks. But it's just a really powerful tool for us to kind of, take a look at what's going on in World vs. World, and then reshuffle as needed to, continue chasing down those more balanced matches. How did I do?
Yeah.
What did I miss, Ray?
Okay. It was okay.
It's okay. I think so too.
Okay. So
I think you nailed
it. Go ahead. Oh yeah, nailed it. All right. So I think the first thing there is when you're talking about reshuffling, I think what you're actually talking about there is essentially making new servers, right? Like the reshuffling will be making new worlds, as it were, right? So we have all these alliances and these guilds within alliances, then of course the free agents of those players outside there. So when we say reshuffle, that would essentially be making brand new worlds or teams, as I believe they're described, very frequently. You would consider doing that maybe even every week or something like that, or even every 8 weeks or something like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Really, it's a matchmaking system. It's like the same matchmaking system that are used in competitive games to create teams. Like they look at a certain number of variables or factors for these players, and they try to create the best match possible with what they have at their disposal. Right? We're basically applying that same thinking or structure to World versus World. And yeah, we'll basically shuffle these players onto brand new teams. And so the names might be consistent between each one of these reshufflings, but the players and the alliances and the guilds that are on each one of those teams is going to be different every single time.
Yeah. Okay. And well, you were talking about names there. So does that mean we're going to be getting a new set of names for all the different teams then? Or is it going to be the same with the servers we have now, just repurposed?
I think it was... Yeah. It should be a different set of names. I think it's important that we're not trying to reuse like the world names that we already that have been there. Like there's a history and kind of an established community behind those things. And I think getting a different set of names maintains that kind of that history, right? People can say Yaxbend and know that history and be able to communicate about it. And I think we dilute that if we like try to reuse those names, right? So I think that's kind of important.
Okay. And
we
I was
gonna add,
no.
we have selected the first. We've selected the first round of these. We tried to find a good balance between really cool, badass sounding names, but also some meme names. There's definitely a server that's named after a Quaggin town, which is really goofy sounding, but we wanted to be a little bit fun with them as well.
You mean the future #1 server?
Yeah, go Mugulu.
Yes.
Muguma, right? There's one there for you, right? You can try and get that going on there as well. So on that note, then, there's a little bit of flair. Is there any plan? This might be a little bit off piece here, actually. Is there any plan to add something like, say, a title or some kind of memorabilia for being on a server that, because these things are essentially going to be rendered obsolete when Alliances come out? Will there be anything like that to commemorate the good old days of, the bitter mist war between these servers with a certain level of reputation?
Yeah, so we've talked about doing that, and I think that's something we mentioned on the forums, even like that was something we wanted to look into doing. How that's going to work is still kind of up in the air, right? Like, do you get a title for the world you're on right now, or do you get a title, like, do you get to pick one of the titles? What is it? Especially because there's a lot of people that have moved around over the years, but still feel like there's a particular place that was their home, right? Like, and that's the place that they associate themselves with, and things like that. So we want to be cognizant of that when we're kind of making like figuring out what that looks like. But I think that's something that we want to do, is not completely obliterate that, but figure out a good way to to give something to folks to commemorate the past.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. And I just wanted to say that I'm also a big fan of giving players agency in making the decision which server they want to have that token or memorabilia for, right? I think trying to find a way to do that programmatically, kind of taking into considerations that Ray just mentioned of, like, maybe I was a player that played on Anvil Rock for 5 years, and then I transferred to a bunch of other servers. Just because those other servers are where I played most recently doesn't necessarily mean that's where I feel home was. Like, I played on Anvil Rock when the game first launched for a number of years. That's where a lot of PvP players went. I've since moved on, but if I had the choice, I probably would pick Anvil Rock as the server to represent. So we want to make sure that players have the ability to kind of choose on their own where they want to have it memorialized.
On that note of player agency, how much agency do players have over their own alliance? Right? For example, can they name their own alliance? And like, how many guilds are allowed in that alliance? Stuff like that. Like, what's the target for that sort of thing?
In terms of naming, I mean, yeah, you should be able to name your alliance, right? Like, just like you can name your guild. So yes, you'll be able to name your alliance. Kind of like smush two completely different topics together there. In terms of like guild sizes for an alliance, like that's I don't think there will be a guild limit per se, but at the same time we want to make sure that we're not like hurting ourselves within the system, right? Like if the UI is completely unruly, if there's 500 guilds with one person in the alliance, right? Like maybe we have a necessity of a limit there. But the whole point of the alliance system really was to give smaller guilds the ability to kind of band together and like go against a big 500 person WoW guild that gets made, right? Because we're going to have both of those situations, right? There's going to be a guild that decides, hey, we're going to just recruit all of the the really awesome WoW players, and we'll be 500 strong. We don't want like a PvE guild that does a lot of other stuff to feel like they can't compete against that. That they could band together with some in an alliance and have a significant number of people that they can get used to playing with and play consistently with. So like to that end, like it makes sense to not really limit as much as we can the number of guilds that would be capable of being in an alliance. What we would limit is the number of players, the number of like individual members that are within an alliance. So yeah.
Yeah. And I believe that limit, as of now, is set at 500, with potential room to kind of move that around a little bit there as well. But are there any current limits on the number of players that can be within a team, or is that not something that will ever be disclosed? Top secret information on what does full mean in an alliance? What does high mean for a team, rather, or for a world?
So, like for a team, what we want is balance, right? And so full doesn't really mean that like we're at capacity. It means that your team is too big compared to all the other teams, right? So that's really what that would mean. Like, and finding the balance of like, okay, we've got this many people that play this many hours, right? We need to spread that across a number of teams. That's something that we can figure out, and we want to find the right balance between, making sure that there's, a significant number of people playing, but we're not completely overcrowding it so that, you've got hour-long queues to try and get into the game, right? And so that's something that we will be able to adjust based on what we see with the system, right?
Yeah, a lot of our conversations. Sorry, real quick, just to add in, a lot of the conversations we're having about, there's a lot of different levers in the system that we can pull and change based on the feedback that we're seeing. I wouldn't say that we're particularly married to any number that we put out there so far. So like 500 is where we're starting, but if we find that we'd have the ability to create better matches by increasing the maximum alliance size to 1,000 players, like we could totally pull that lever. So like these things aren't set in stone. It's really going to come down to the betas and the feedback and the data that we're seeing to help inform what those things look like ultimately. Like the goal here is to create great matches. And so whatever it takes to get to that end is the most important thing for us. But we're not beholden to or tied to any specific number on really any part of the system at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to burst into action there, Roy? I think I saw some excitement over there. What do you have for us?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could. I don't know if I'm really supposed to be even talking here, but so just to kind of follow up a little bit on when we were discussing worlds being full, right? So something that I saw brought up a lot is the whole the transferring thing, and I know this has been discussed a little bit, but are players going to have the ability to transfer freely? Are they, once they select a world versus world guild, right? Because that's obviously what designates you into an alliance. Are you going to be able to then transfer between servers or teams or whatever you want to call them, that your alliance, your guild is not on? If you come back to the game and your guild is part of an alliance, 3 months down the road or something, and you pick that guild as your alliance, are you going to be able to get into the same team as them, even if it is full? What's the deal with that? Oh, and also NA versus EU. Sorry.
Yeah. So, well, the NA versus EU one is easy, right? Like we're going to still provide the ability to transfer between the data centers, right? Like that's a service that can't go away, and that's something that we've got to continue to support, right? And like with that, like obviously, if you get placed on an NA team and transfer to EU, you won't have an EU team, right? So there's going to have to be some kind of system that gets you onto a team. Right now, what that system is, like for the beta, is that we basically you have the ability to pick a team, right? We're not doing a whole lot in terms of like actually enforcing the population balance at that level. Like when you're like manually picking a team, just when we build the teams initially with the data set that we have, right? We're going to have the balanced teams there. Eventually, what we're going to have is a lot more granularity in the ability to monitor team populations and how people are moving around between the teams. Right now, we don't have as much. It's not as tight as we would like it to be, where we can get big movements of players, and that really shifts the population balance. And the system that we currently have is slow to respond to that, right? Like, so what this would be able to do is effectively at a per player moving around level, like readjust the notion of what the team populations are and how they relate to each other, and change the open and close status basically very quickly. I think that brings up a lot of questions in terms of like, okay, well, I've got a guild and I want to move my entire guild, right? How do I do that, right? And so the details about how those transfers work, and things in terms of like, what is there a gem cost for those kinds of transfers, things like that. We don't have, super solid answers yet because we don't know exactly how, players need to interact with that kind of system. But there will be something in place that allows you to adjust and like effectively correct errors. Like you were saying, like, I just came back, I didn't get put on a team and I want to play with my guild, right? Like that's a feels bad man, situation when you don't get to do that, right? Like I want to play with my friends and I can't. And right now we currently have like a really bad version of that where if your world's full, there's nothing you can do aside from transfer to, like a link, and then that goes away, right? Then you have to transfer again. And that's not a good player experience. And so what we're going to have is, you're going to be able to say, okay, well, I want to, world v world with my guild, and next matchmaking, I'm going to get placed with them because I select them as my battle guild. And then, from there, like potentially give some options, right? Like you'd be able to select the world because it's not too full, right? It's not the biggest world or too far big compared to everyone else, right? And so like I think we have a lot more flexibility there. And then we can also do cool things like, you want to transfer to this world? Well, you have a guild on that world, so we're going to be a little bit more forgiving because you actually have people that you would play with over there. Versus, just a person picking a random world that they don't have any association with, right? Like I don't have any friends on that world, or I don't have a guild on that world. And so there's a lot we can play with there. We just need to figure out what exactly the knobs and stuff that we need for that are, and then, get them implemented and be able to, turn them.
Are there going to be other things that are going to... Sorry, we should figure out a system for this. I'll raise my hand, maybe. The other thing I was going to mention, too, is... the other thing I was going to mention is season length. I think will have a pretty big impact on what we need to do for server transfer or for team transfers as well. Like if we ended up... Right now, we have basically 8-week seasons, right? From when we do reshuffling of world linking. That could be the length in the future, at which point having a solution for team transfer is much more important. If we decide that the right timing between new matchmaking is 2 weeks or 4 weeks, like that's a little bit... I think the need for a really robust transfer system is reduced slightly. So I think there are other things you're going to factor in that we're going to see during the betas that will inform what we do with transfers.
And yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, Roy, back to you.
Oh,
just because I
yeah. That's true. Yeah, it's hard to keep track of who's interrupting who right now. It's difficult to say. Yeah, Roy, please go ahead.
I just had a quick question. So obviously you've mentioned Moogaloo, right, as one of the team names. And you mentioned there's still going to be like this split between NA and EU, essentially. Are you going to have just the same exact list of team names on EU as on NA? Because obviously right now, all the servers on EU are different than the servers on NA, and there are more servers on EU than NA. Do you have an idea of if you're going to have more team options for one region over the other, just based off of the population of each? Or do you not have an idea of that? You're going to wait until the alliances are formed and see,
So I think the number of teams is going to be directly related to, like those variables I was talking about, right? We want to get a good balance between, having a good population for the map and not having, infinitely long queues. How we adjust that is going to be, kind of, like we're going to need to adjust it over time, I guess is what I'm saying. Like right now, we don't have, we have significantly less flexibility with that, right? Because like if we were to increase the number of teams in an A, right, we only have so many worlds, right? So the population imbalance could get worse. Maybe it gets better, right? And so but we only have so many pieces. With this system, because of the the granularity that we're looking at, right? We could balloon it out so that there's 500 people per team, right? And that's obviously too few, right? But we would basically be able to make sure that there's the same number of people per team, and that population balance still gets maintained. And so likely what we're going to be able to do is test that as part of matchmaking. Like, what would it look like if we had 9 teams? What would it look like if we had 15 teams, right? And look at how that adjusts the numbers, and through observation and some analytics, figure out what we want our actual target to be, and then try to match that with that as well, right?
I think there was another question there of like, what was the names? Like, do they differ between NA and EU? I think that for the first beta, they're actually the same set of names that we're pulling for each. Is that right, Ray? We've got like one master list.
We've got one master list, but I believe that you will not see one set of those names in like, basically it's a list, but like we go like, this is the first NA team, second NA team, third NA team, and then it gets like it goes down. But yeah, I mean, eventually we're going to want to make sure that we've got kind of a standard set of names that you can at the very least differentiate between across both data centers, right? When you're talking about your team, you don't want to be like, okay, well, what version of that team? Is it the NA team? Is it the EU team?
And this isn't the most important thing for us to solve right now, but Ray and I were riffing on this yesterday, but it'd be really fun to change those names on a regular basis. And I think there's probably a lot of different ways that we could get inspiration for the names for the servers. You catch my meaning? So I know. I think the initial set's fun, but I think there's a lot of cool things that we could do just because they're going to cycle every time, right? Like folks shouldn't get attached to the team name because that's their team name for that specific matchmaking, for that specific iteration of world restructuring. And then, you might be on Mugulu this week and next week you're going to be on Griffinfall. So like, don't get too attached to Mugulu and you don't really have a choice to pick that one. So I think there's an opportunity for us to cycle those out much more frequently than obviously what we've had with Worlds and World Linking.
It's more about playing with an alliance than it is on a server.
Yeah.
Correct. This, right? So would be the idea.
I wanted to talk a little bit about seasons. So we've heard this word come up a little bit. Like, what exactly is that? And then are there any other plans around seasons? For example, to have some kind of competitive structure. This was hinted at a little bit in the blog post. Maybe a little bit too early for that. But yeah, what's the plan? What's the deal with seasons? With these new seasons that are happening?
I'll start real quick. I knew that so we use the term season to describe the time between matchmaking events or world linking events, right? So right now, like seasons in the way that we think about it, already happening on live because it's the time between, world linking happens and you've got that experience for 8 weeks and then it switches again. It could become something more, and that's something that we are keeping in mind. I get pinged a lot about tournaments, the ones that happened back in, was it 2013, 2014? A lot of folks have really fond memories of that time. A lot of the folks have less fond memories, and they remember the long hours that it took to be competitive in the mode at that time. And so, and I kind of touched on this, or we touched on this in the blog post, kind of at the end, kind of forward looking for us. But right now we're trying to resolve a lot of the core issues with the game mode, make sure that we have much more balanced matches in the world, make sure that rewards feel much more compelling, and then from there, I still fundamentally believe that the way the game mode is played will be significantly different at that point. Players are very reward motivated, and so if there's a new shiny for them to chase down, I can see the play patterns changing to accommodate for that. At that point, we're going to go and rebalance the mode based on making sure that it still meets our vision for it, making sure that all the pieces are working appropriately. And I think from there, I think there's definite opportunity for us to increase the competitiveness of the mode, whether it's going to be through things like leaderboards. I know a lot of the guilds and guild leaders I've been talking to would love to see a way to compare themselves against other guild leaders or other alliances, and I think that's totally viable. But the actual form and shape that a season takes, or what that actually means as a tournament, is still TBD. But we definitely want to make sure that we don't get into a position where players are burning themselves out trying to compete in that mode. So I very much doubt it would come back in the same way that it was implemented back in 2013 and 2014, just kind of knowing some of the friction around that. But Ray likes to wax poetic about this pretty frequently. So Ray, do you got any other thoughts on that?
No, I think you pretty much summed up everything that I would have said. Yeah. Okay.
For sure, and you got the chat a little bit excited there. You were talking about rewards. Is there anything coming with alliances that will enhance that, or is it going to be the same reward structure for now? Is that something again that will be developed in the future after the full release of World Restructuring?
So I did just lag out. I'm on Wi-Fi, committing a gamer sin right now. I apologize. So, like I mentioned, like we mentioned in the blog post, right now our focus is going to be on world restructuring. You know, I don't think it's a secret at this point that our team is working right now to get Ender Dragons out the door, and that's where most of our focus and attention is. We do have the team of engineers that are working on world restructuring because it's mostly a back end feature. Like I would say 99% of the feature is going to be back end work, stuff that players aren't never going to really see, and there's a very light front end that they will actually be able to interact with. But that's our focus for right now. I think there are some small changes. There are some small changes that we're investigating in the short term that would impact existing reward systems. So I'm thinking things like skirmish tracks. And so we're looking into those. I can't comment on like specific changes at this point, but I think those are fairly easy knobs for us to tweak in the short term. But in terms of like new reward systems or new fresh rewards being added to the mode while we're working on alliances, like that's not really a thing we're focused on at this point.
Okay. Yeah, and just to kind of highlight that, actually, I think this is a very exciting thing that might be coming down the line, is a focus on active play as opposed to the somewhat passive reward structures that currently exist in World versus World. So definitely stay tuned for that one, guys. Like, I think that is going to be interesting. And as Grouch shows here, like I think alliances in general are certainly going to incentivize people to fight for their guild. I think guild pride is still very much a thing. Server pride may well be dead. Well, and even that's not fully dead, but certainly guild pride will certainly motivate people to play in a somewhat different way. And of course, that will translate to alliances as well. And to kind of loop around a little bit there, actually, like alliances are going to have a name as well. Are they also going to have a tag, or are players still going to be representing their guilds in World versus World? Could you represent an alliance instead of representing your guild, or what?
Yeah, the being able to rep your alliance, I think, is an important aspect of, kind of maintaining that pride that you're talking about, right? And also, creating the rivalries and things that we love, within the game, the game currently, right? I want to be able to look at someone's tag and know that they're from, some alliance, and know what that means, right? Like, oh, that's, such and such alliance. They, this is how they play, or this is what they like to do. This is what they're, like that kind of, play, I think, is very fun. As far as like repping, right? Like this is kind of an important distinction that I think that we should, kind of highlight. Right now, there's no plan to force you to rep in any particular way in World versus World, similar to the way that it works now, right? You enter World versus World, you can rep any of your guilds. And I think that's important as well, right? To maintain. The battle guild that you pick, like your World versus World guild, is there to help you organize onto teams, right? Like, we're going to be able to place you on a team, and it's going to, help you decide what player set you're going to be playing with. But I think there's need and opportunity for people to potentially tag up differently while they're in World versus World, and so like. Presently, there's no forced tagging that you're going to need to do, and so I suspect that similar to the way guild representative works now, you'll be able to represent your alliance or not, right? I think that's something we'll probably maintain. Whether or not you can represent your alliance and your guild, at the same time, I don't know what the details of like your nameplate's going to look like with this.
We're going to keep expanding out, just more and more horizontal.
Yeah, and we're not going to center it anymore. It's just going to go sideways, right?
Something sort of similar to that, and this may maybe go back a little bit to something else we were discussing earlier. But is there going to be any sort of list of alliances and the guilds that they include anywhere so that people can see, or is that going to be just something that you have to know? Because obviously we can see all the servers now, right? Everyone knows what the servers are. There's various websites to display them. But how are you going to know where a specific alliance is, and who is in that alliance, or is there not really going to be a function for that?
Right now we don't have any details in terms of like how that would work and what kinds of things we would even, want or need to surface to the community for that, right? I suspect that like through the API we'll have some ability to get that information, right? And that ultimately would allow the community to build, tools and stuff like that if that's what they wanted, right? And I think that would be super helpful. But in terms of like in game, right, like we're going to be much more focused on like managing your battle guild, managing your alliance, right? And focusing there, because there's a lot of, that's where a lot of the player interaction is going to be with the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do I can I kick members out of my battle guild? Can I kick guilds out of my alliance? Who has the authority to do these things in these places, right? Like those are the kind of questions that we want to kind of explore and answer, with the community's help. Like, what tools do you need as a guild leader to manage this system, right? And we've already been talking a lot with a lot of guild leaders and community leaders in the game, to get a lot of that feedback and get a lot of that information. Like, how do you envision needing to interact with the system? So like one of the things that comes up quite frequently is like, can I decide who's allowed to join my battle guild and who's not allowed to join my battle guild, right? And so it seems like that there's a need for some kind of permission-based system for that. That doesn't exist in the beta presently, but like it's something that we're looking at and basically building infrastructure to be able to support something like that, right? Like through like guild roles and permissions or something like that. So that's kind of where our in-game UX and UI experience is going to be focused. We've talked about things like guild leaderboards and alliance leaderboards, like down the line, as something we could talk about looking
Very
into,
cool.
like especially for like that kind of guild pride, right?
Yeah.
Bit of GVG.
But
bit of GVG, Roy.
No, we don't use that word.
And so like, but like that, I could also see that, just being, part of stats that we track in the API as well, right? So we could do some external versions of that as well, right? Like there's a lot of options that we have available to provide that kind of information, and just what form it takes is TBD.
Yeah, I probably should have led with this comment or this discussion up front, but we're kind of dancing around our approach for development on this feature, which is a lot different than what we've done for other parts of the game. We have a history of trying to build the Cadillac version of a feature and then releasing it, and then hoping that it checks the box for every one of our players. Oftentimes it works out for us, and sometimes it doesn't. And I think the WoWa community is deeply entrenched. These folks have been playing the game mode. A lot of folks that I talked to have been playing for 9 years. And everyone's got different needs. Everyone's got different wants for the game mode. And so we want to try to deliver the smallest versions of these features possible, so that we can actually get it out in front of folks, have folks experience it, and then provide feedback on that. That'll help inform what we on our end go and do and focus and prioritize next. I think like things like how you manage guilds and how you manage alliances. Like, we've got a lot of initial ideas, and we have kind of like an understanding of what we need to do to support that experience, rather. But the thing is that Ray and I, we're not expert guild leaders by any means. Like, that's not where our expertise lies. Like, we are game developers, and so we absolutely need the insight and the perspective from other folks who actually do this on a day-to-day basis, and all the pain points that they have with these systems. And we'll use that to build out the roadmap and all the functionality that we need to add in for the alliances system. We can take a stab at it, but it might mean that we make a bunch of features or do a bunch of work that don't actually move the needle for these players, and that's just not really good use of our time and our resources. And I think it frustrates players too. And so this is different than what we've done historically. It's going to feel weird. I think it's going to feel weird for us, because we're even compromising in some areas in terms of like quality. I can tell you that our UX and UI team's not super happy about what we're doing with the UI at this point, but they understand our approach, what we're doing here, and I think it's going to take some understanding and some flexibility from our players as well, as we kind of step through this. Sorry, I just wanted to talk about the philosophy behind it a little bit, because I think that the thing we're trying to say is, like, we are shipping the minimal version so we can get feedback on it, so we can actually build the version that players want that will solve their problems.
I think that is awesome. There's only one issue with that, and that is that players, especially the wordless world community, have no idea what they want. But other than that, I love that philosophy. It's really cool. Sorry.
I think you're only kind of right, Roy. I think a lot of people know what they want. It's just not everyone agrees on what the community as a whole, wants and needs.
Yes.
And that's why we got to look at it from a lot of different perspectives. Like, I remember when we first did the blog post, we had people commenting about, like, how is this going to affect the role play servers, right? And like, that was completely out of left field for me. I'm like, I didn't even think about that, and it was something we looked into and had to make sure, like, we weren't going to like completely destroy this this community, even though they're that it's not an official, like, we don't have an official RP server, but like we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to stomp on those people's gameplay, right? And we want to make sure that
Tarnish Coast, baby.
We're hearing all those voices and getting getting those perspectives, and then using that to help look at how we're going to develop this feature and what features we need for it, right?
Yeah. I will say that, as game developers, like when we receive feedback, like there's kind of two levels of understanding of player feedback. There's what the player is saying, like what they're telling you, like what their proposed solution is, but there's also a layer deeper, which is like, what is the problem that they're describing? And typically we try to focus in on the problems that players are describing and their concerns, as opposed to the solutions that are being represented. Now, there are some areas where like taking the solution does make sense. Like we're talking about like knobs and controls that guild leaders need for the alliance system. Like there's probably going to be a lot of great suggestions there that are just like, yes, that's the obvious solution. We should do that. But typically, we listen more to the problems or what players are trying to describe, the issue they're trying to describe, as opposed to the solution to the problem. I think we're going to have to talk about this a bit more as we actually get into the betas on this feature too, to help folks understand, like, hey, describe the issue that you're experiencing and why you think this is a really important issue for us to resolve. And that'll help us be able to prioritize it and actually put the design team and the engineering team, the folks who are actually responsible for creating the feature, they can put their heads together and figure out the right solution for that problem.
Yeah. So something kind of just to go off of what you were talking about, how you really want to try and continue to develop this, which again, great idea. So one of the concerns that I think a lot of players in the Worlds World community will have, and something that a lot of people obviously have been talking about for a long time, is, and you mentioned this, population imbalance, right? So players bandwagoning, overstacking 1, 2, 3 servers or whatever out of the rest, and so then you have 1 or 2 servers that are just absolutely obliterating everyone. And of course, the fear is that, well, this is cool because it's giving players and potentially guilds a little bit more control over themselves. They can form their own alliances, right? They can kind of choose who they play with. But at the same time, they could abuse that, right? And of course, this could just come back to the community. But do you have any plans to really keep an eye on that? If you do notice that one specific alliance is just absolutely destroying everybody else, it's not even fair. Is there, are you going to step in and say, hey, we're breaking you apart? Do you think you'd ever do that? Because obviously that really takes away from the player's self-control. Any sort of thoughts on that?
I think the hope for us is that we don't have to. The ideal scenario is that we don't have to police things on that level, like going in and try to break up individual alliances, right? So I think it's incumbent on us to design a system that prevents those things from happening as much as possible. I think this is a big part of why we're trying to. This is why we are starting with 500 as the cap for a guild and an alliance, is because it's basically the smallest chunk that we can get to, because that's basically the maximum size of a guild as it stands today, right? And so we want to start with that number to help mitigate this problem. And if we do find that like we need to grow that for a variety of reasons, we can do that. But we want to try to keep these chunks small so that they're manageable. A 500 player guild could have a significant impact on a matchup, but to what degree we don't actually know quite yet. You could probably have those players playing 24/7 over the course of a week. That sounds super unhealthy, and I hope no one actually does that. That's not advice.
That sounds like a challenge.
Please don't. But I think we want to start there, and so we're hoping that that's the sweet spot. And if not, we'll kind of go from there. A lot of this is a really big experiment. Like we have a lot of ideas and theories how this is going to pan out, but like players don't always do the thing that you expect them to do, especially when there are new motivations like rewards or whatever that might be introduced to the mix. And so a lot of it's going to be us reacting to what we actually see. We can spend a lot of times trying to solve problems that we haven't seen yet, and we do spend some time doing that. But right now we're mostly trying to focus it on the knowns because there's plenty of work there to be done as it is.
Okay.
Ray, do you have anything to add on that front?
I have a couple of things to add because I've been trying to monitor chat a little bit and pick up on some stuff. So I want to. An alliance is not a team. This is like kind of a common confusing point. A team can have multiple alliances within it, right? An alliance is not like, we don't build an alliance and that's the team. We build a team out of alliances, guilds, and like individual players. That's kind of an important note, right? Because an alliance doesn't have to be 500 people. There's an important reason why an alliance is 500 people. Like Grouch was saying, like that's like kind of the smallest chunk that we can go to. We can't do like 250, right? Because you can have you can have a guild of 500 people. So if you wanted to have a bigger chunk, you'd just not make an alliance. You'd make a guild and invite everyone to that guild, right? And we don't want to penalize the people that are, you know, forming alliances out of guilds by making their, you know, their maximum size smaller than, you know, a group that, you know, can logistically get everyone into a guild and organize that, right? And so we want to maintain that. I think there was one more thing that I wanted to mention, but I can't remember now.
It's okay.
Oh. So this iterative approach that we've seen here, and we will hopefully see in other areas of the game too. Very good idea. Just want to echo Roy on that one. I love to see it. I really do. Sorry there to the UI team. You know, my condolences. But is there any kind of rough estimate of how long these different phases of the beta? Because once again, in the blog post, it said that, you know, the initial beta is going to be for a week. Maybe it gets extended after a while. Maybe it then gets repeated, right, over different times. How many iterations of each phase do you think will be required? I mean, I guess that's a bit of a bit of an impossible question, but you know what? Here we go. Give me the impossible answer.
So the impossible answer is we don't really know, right? A lot of it really depends on what shakes out of these betas, right? Like a big thing that we deal with, especially on a system this large, is testing it at scale, right? This might come as a shock to some people, but there are more Guild Wars 2 players than there are ArenaNet employees, and so we can't really mimic the live game, right? Like we don't have a good way to like in like our development environment, like do world versus world at that scale. And so there's some things that, like, even if we had, you know, as much, you know, like like basically we do as much testing as we can, but there's still big variables. There's still going to be that situation where, you know, we've got a 1 in a million bug, but because there's, you know, so many people playing the game, that bug happens all the time, right? Like that's the issue we're dealing with at scale, right? You know, 10 QA people hitting the same system, you know, as much as they can, like, still won't find that bug, right? And honestly, over the history of my time in ArenaNet, there's been lots of cases like this, right? And so testing at scale is kind of a big thing for us. So these betas are helping us do that. And so, you know, beta goes and bugs are going to shake out, and we're going to address those issues. We're going to make an assessment as to where we're at, right? Like after we've addressed those issues, potentially do more betas, more issues shake out, right? And that's the kind of cycle that we want to get into, because it's really important, especially phase 1. We're building that foundational layer, right? We're building the core pieces that we have to build off of for the rest of the features. And ideally, we get into a situation where we're not worried about bugs in that like foundation layer. We are focusing on like the additional features, you know, the additional things that we're adding, and focusing our efforts there rather than really spreading ourselves across the entire project all the time, right? So that's like one of the reasons why we're not, you know, we don't have, you know, alliances in the initial beta, right? Because that's an additional piece that could break, and it's a lot easier to focus on a smaller subset of things, make sure they're rock solid, and then move on to the next thing, because you can focus a lot harder on that thing, and the process of iterating becomes a lot easier that way.
Yeah, I think it'd be easy for us to pick an arbitrary done date, you know, but like wouldn't be informed by any of the problems or the the emergent stuff that we had to deal with through the process. It also doesn't really get us any closer to our goal, which is like, does the feature solve the problem? Like that's really the finish line for us, is like, did we do the work needed to solve the player problems and make World vs. World a more balanced experience? We could put we could put a due date on that or a deadline, but it would be super arbitrary and we'd probably miss it because it wouldn't be informed by anything real. And so
when it's ready.
When it's ready, like, and I think the difference between when it's ready, as players have usually heard, is that you'll see progress as we go, right? Like we'll ship it to live, we'll beta test it. At some point, maybe we can leave the system on in a more permanent fashion, even though it's not done yet. Like there's a number of different ways we could tackle this problem, right? But ultimately, yeah, we're not going to be done with the feature until we're done with it, right? Until it's actually achieving the goals that we set out for it.
Yep.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So sort of just to bounce off of what I asked a little bit earlier, and this might be the exact same answer, but obviously a big concern. So, you know, like I was saying, you know, maybe one alliance is just steamrolling everyone. You know, fair enough. That's a little bit more of the player control, and that's something that we can see down the line. But something that people have been brought up a lot, or bringing up a lot, and Ray, you mentioned this, that teams aren't one alliance, right? It's not that 500 player group, it's several alliances. So is there going to be any sort of control over the alliances that you're teamed with? How are you guys planning on pairing alliances? Besides just based off of size, is it just going to be this alliance is 300 players, this alliance is 200 players, we put them together, and then there's one 500 alliance that they fight? Or are there going to be other factors that you're looking at to group alliances together?
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of bounced back to this, because it reminded this was the thing I wanted to touch on. So
we're linked, right? It's our names.
Right now we are like our matchmaking system is effectively built on a relatively simple data set that we're going to be working with. It's the same concept of population that we're using presently for world linking, right? Which is effectively activity on the map, right? Like it is people, and how much they are playing world versus world, right? Like the old simple explanation is like, one person that plays for 10 hours, isn't, and one person that plays for 1 hour, they are not contributing equally, right? And so like just counting them as individuals doesn't work, right? So there's got to be some kind of algorithm there. And one of the things that we're doing with the system is like that's a piece that we can iterate on and tweak. And we've got some ideas on how we can look at the history, right? Like we've done, we just went through a season, and you were saying like one team completely dominates, right? So we'll look at, the data about that team, work with our analytics team to try to like figure out like what things can we tweak, what variables can we add to the system that help predict like that this team was going to dominate, right? And then like feed that in and see if and like iterate on our matchmaking that way. Like we don't one player, like me playing world versus world 10 hours is not the equivalent of like anyone else here playing world versus world 10 hours, right? Like I'm obviously way better at the game than everyone else is. No, I'm just like I'm terrible, right? Like I feed the whole time. And that's because I run tag up, right? Like I go to have fun, right? And so it's basically a feed fest for me. And like we want maybe like deaths, right? Like is something that we identify as a thing that could help
Really?
Predict this stuff, right? Like we don't know, right? We don't know what those variables are, but like we wanted to build a system that we could look at that kind of stuff and see if it helps, right? And that's a really tricky area of really tricky area to work in, right? Like how do you like we can't do like you can't do like a normal like elo or something to for like an individual, right? Like there's hundreds and hundreds of people playing on your team. Like it doesn't, like you could have just stood and repaired a wall the entire time and you still get the win, right? And that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And so we want to make sure that we're figuring out things that can help identify what like a player's contribution, like commanders, right? Like you get a pub commander, and that's really valuable to a team, right? They organize all the people that are just kind of running around aimlessly on the map, and like a map with 100 people on it, and no tag versus a map with 100 people and 2 tags, right? Is like that's a big difference, right? And so we want to make sure that we're kind of able to look at that stuff in the future and figure out what it is. One of the reasons we're not doing that now is because we want to start at a baseline. Like we know how the game plays right now. We know, what this population algorithm effectively looks like, presently, and it's just another variable that we don't have to mess with while we're doing like these initial betas, right? Once we've got, like I said, that more solid foundation, we can start looking at that stuff and messing around with it if we think that it's going to be beneficial, right?
Yeah, the more variables that we introduce in the matchmaking, the harder it is to deep dive, like where the actual root issue is, right? So yeah, just to reinforce what Raymond's saying, like start simple, make sure it works, because again, I know this system's gonna look not super. Most of it's on the back end, right? Like the front end is going to be very, very light. It is largely a back end system. We want to try to keep things as simple as possible so that if the thing does break or doesn't go well, we can very easily diagnose and understand what's going wrong. And then from there, any additional variables that we want to try to add into matchmaking will be born out of a need or some sort of problem that we're trying to solve, right? So looking for, introducing something that might reflect player skill is very interesting. Language. There's a lot of different things that we could incorporate, but we're going to do that as it makes sense to do so, and making sure that it also solves a problem that we're seeing with the game mode. We just don't want to add a bunch of stuff up front that we don't know that we need yet, and also might actually make our lives harder to iterate on the system.
And to kind of go on the iteration thing again, actually, if everyone really likes, let's say that beta 1 goes really well, or phase 1 rather, goes extremely well, and everyone really likes it, would you ever consider having it in the game for longer periods of time instead of just say a week, or even having it like semi-permanently replacing the current system instead of the current thing now, or would it just break horribly and explode?
Doing it week to week is something that we eventually want to get to. Right now, a lot of what we're doing on the back end, like there's manual processes and monitoring that we need to do for these kind of betas, right? We don't know how the system's going to behave, and so we need to spend time. Like we need to spend dev time, like looking at logs and filing issues and all of that stuff. And so and like honestly, that's a lot of high level stress, right? Like putting something out like this on live, right? We've got to make sure that it's not exploding the game. And so like there's a significant effort there, and we ideally want to get some of the pieces that we're doing manually automated, right? We want to make sure that like we don't actually have to have someone pressing the button to make the thing go at the times that it needs to. And things like that. And so for this beta, probably not. Maybe we would, like in like a really dreamy, situation, we'd do it for 2 weeks. But like the system's live during the weekend, and so we want to also make sure that it's not blowing up over the weekend and things like that. And we want to give the devs break time in between that kind of like sprint, basically, right, or the marathon of making sure everything's going. So eventually, I think, like we want to be able to test that. We want to be able to do that stuff, but probably not for the first one.
Yeah. Just to reinforce, default assumption is that we wouldn't extend it. It could be that we very quickly turn around and do another one. The beauty of the system is that it doesn't actually require a game build for us to stand it up again. It just can all be done in the back end, and so we have a lot of flexibility here. And I think that as we go through these betas, you're going to see variation in the cadence and like the duration of these beta tests. Like as we progress further, we'll probably move into doing like a 2-week test, or even like a 4-week test, maybe an 8-week test. And it really largely depends on which functionality is in the game at that point, and if we're at a point where we feel we can actually run that, and it's going to feel like a good experience. But yeah, first beta probably limited. We'll go back and we'll huddle up and figure out what we actually need to do to get to that next step. If we feel that we're there with that initial implementation, we might turn it on in the weeks following. But yeah, just expect the actual structuring cadence of this to change quite a bit through development.
Do you guys have any? So in terms of transferring, and I believe I don't know if you can touch upon this, but when when obviously alliances get formed, or sorry, put in the game more permanently, whatever the reshuffling period is, whatever you want to call that, a season or whatever, is there going to be a period where people can transfer between teams?
So by
by
period,
delete the last 15 seconds.
No. Like I'm more confused by the period, right? Like
trying to interpret the question.
Yeah, we talk.
All right, so let me rephrase. Okay. So obviously, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but you guys are going to essentially, every time you reshuffle, right, you're going to be forming an alliance, and so, or sorry, you're going to be putting different. Right, a team, right? So you'll be putting different alliances together. Is there going to be an ability? Because right now, every time there's relinks, every 2 months, let's say I'm a guild, right? And I enjoy fighting other guilds. And obviously this is slightly less relevant with the other Edge of the Mist changes, but maybe I want to be on a different server than a different guild, a specific guild. So after relinks, I have the ability to transfer, right? I can transfer off of the server that I was linked to, wherever I was put. Will I still have that ability as either an alliance or a guild to transfer if I don't like the team that I was put onto?
So, like I was saying, like we don't have the full details of what transferring looks like. after this has gone out, right? We don't know what tools are going to be needed. Those tools are going to be focused more on the correction of, like I didn't get picked on, or I didn't get put on the right team because I didn't check the box fast enough, right?
An individual player.
Yeah, like focused on an individual player and less on big group moves for guilds and stuff like that. Now, like that doesn't mean that a guild couldn't move. It's just it is going to be focused on like the notion that we're having individual players move, and so there might be significantly more situations where we get like you get half your guild moved, and that's put the population imbalance too high, and so that server gets locked down.
Yeah, so
but like there's details.
It's going to be worked out, right? I think is the
yeah. I'll just note that like the idea of moving entire guilds or alliances, like that kind of undermines the system, right? Like we don't want there to be too much movement there because like that throws it throws everything out of whack. And so like there's definitely going to have to be some constraints on what that actually looks like. And I think that the way you framed the question was like I get transferred into I get match made into a team and I don't like it. I think the interesting question there is like, why didn't you like that, and what can we do to solve that problem, as opposed to trying to improve flexibility through the transfer system.
And something that when the original blog post announcing World Restructuring came out all those years ago, something that I think a lot of people commented on, and something that I've seen in the chat and that I frequently get is, is there a way to essentially set another alliance or a guild, whatever, either one, as a rival, so you never get placed on a team with them, and therefore essentially avoiding this issue or preventing parts of that issue, maybe.
It's a bit match manipulating.
Presently,
true. Yeah, it is.
Right, and that's exactly the reason why, right? Like,
right,
because like one of the things that we like talked about very early on, right, was what about languages, right? Right now we've got servers that are that have multiple a specific language, right? What is this going to do to those communities, right? And things like that. And so one of the experiments we did and we found was rather successful was like in EU we don't force links to be same language anymore, right?
Right.
Like links can go whatever way they need to in order to get those worlds as close in population as we can get. And so what we found is like that didn't cause the major disruptions that we were afraid that it might. So that was a good experiment. Like, and we wanted to do that experiment because for the same reason, right? Like right now we've got one Spanish speaking team, right? Like, and so like if we put all the Spanish guilds into one team, like how does that completely mess up the the balance there? And so we want to make sure that we're not introducing variables and abilities that basically undermine the system. That's not to say that we wouldn't potentially look at some of that stuff, right? We're looking at like can we use language to kind of influence the matchmaking, right? Like and things like that. But like if that doesn't work, right? If that breaks the whole thing and we've got to like effectively do World Restructuring 2 to fix it again, like that we've kind of, the system has failed, right? And the most important thing for us right now is making sure that we're not undermining the whole point of the system, which is population balance and making sure that we have good fun matchups, right? Like that's what we want out of this thing, and we want to make sure that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot with that.
That makes a lot of sense.
I wanted to explain Teapot's comment that offhanded comment that he made at Roy's suggestion, which is match manipulation. Just to just make sure that folks, just so folks understand kind of like at least my interpretation of what that means, and I think we're on the same page here. But if I'll use PvP as an example. Like if I'm queuing in high-end PvP on EU and Syndruner's online, like who's a very high-level thief, like I don't want to fight against Syndruner. If I could just block him and not get match made with him, that means I could still progress in PvP and gain rating without actually having to face the best players, which creates a problem. Like not everyone's actually on the same playing field. And so I think like thinking about the problem there that you're trying to resolve with the suggestion of like, can I block alliances to not get match made with them? I think it's one of those problems we'd want to like think about like, well, are there other ways that are better to solve this that isn't just preventing them from getting match made together? Like are there other systems that are failing or not doing their job that we want to look at? But I just wanted to like help people understand kind of like I think that's the kind of core problem with just like preventing alliances from being match made with each other, is that you can actually start to manipulate and chip away at the integrity of the game mode if you don't actually have people facing each other in the way that system intends.
Yeah, that's very nice. Counter argument is that World vs. World players, unlike the PvP players you spoke of, are extremely honorable and would never do something like
Oh, really? Yeah.
Never
Confirmed.
has there been in World vs. World any sort of issue such as that you speak of. And I can say with complete certainty that would never happen. But fair enough. I understand your point of view.
Yeah, you know, Roy, I'm glad you said that, because that simplifies the system a lot, because we can just let you pick your team and
you should
every time. Yeah, like that's
you should let me pick the teams.
Well, Roy picks the teams. That's the new matchmaker.
Yeah.
All the teams are going to be Roy's Boys 1s, Roy's Boys 2, Roy's Boys. It sounds good to me. But anyway, yeah. All right. Sorry. Please. I'll mute again.
Yeah. I think, you know, we're kind of getting towards the end. We're looking at the time here, and we're starting to get towards the end of our scheduled time. There's just kind of a few little ones to wrap up here. Alliances, are they going to have a chat? And I think this was also covered a little bit earlier, but is time zone coverage going to be a consideration during matchmaking? Is there going to be like a goal prime time period of time during the day that is going to be the target where most guilds are going to be active, or are we just going to all get completely farmed by all the night cappers all over again?
So chat, yeah, I would love there to be a chat. There's not going to be a chat in the beta. Again, one of those, like, just another thing that we didn't have to worry about, you know, breaking or, you know, causing issues. But yeah, ideally there's going to be a chat. There's some consideration there in terms, like, especially if we increase like the guild or the alliance size, right? Like our chat system has been very robustly tested at a particular size maximum, which is the 500 of a guild. But like that's not to say that we couldn't do a chat if we went to bigger alliance sizes. There would just need to be more testing and consideration there. For your other question, time zone and play and play time and stuff like that. Right now, no. Like we're not like Grouch was saying. We want to do basically the simplest version of a lot of these things to make sure that they're working and doing what we intend them to do. That's not to say that that's not something that we could look at. But one of the things we definitely want to see is, okay, with the world's balanced, right, and with with the populations balanced, is time zone the right thing to be looking at, right? Are there other ways to solve the time zone and night capping and things like that, right? Are there other solutions that we can come up with that? Because that might not be like take the people who play at a particular time that's off hours and spread them across a bunch of worlds, right? Because that could be like a not fun experiment or experience for those guilds, right? Are there other things that we can do that don't hurt their gameplay because they play it at an off time, but also solve the problem of, like, it feels bad to do a whole lot of work at prime time and be winning and then come back because you don't have the presence and effectively the remaining 16 hours of time, and like be losing because you don't have your team doesn't have a good presence there.
Gotta buy an NA guild, man.
Yeah, I think what it really is that, like, that points, like Josh was saying, or Grouch, I don't know what you want to go by. Josh, I'm gonna say Josh because that's what
Mr. Davis.
Yeah, please.
We want to look at the problem and not necessarily like that the suggested solution. That might be the solution that we go with, but the problem is that night capping and off hours play has problems. Like it doesn't feel good for both teams, both sides of that coin if it's imbalanced in weird ways. So yeah,
absolutely. It's a hard thing to hit for sure, but it's an important one.
Okay, Then before we maybe move on to maybe one or two questions from the chat to wrap it up there in case you missed something. Roy, do you? I've got a bit of a spicy question that I'll save for the last one. So Roy, if you have any kind of closing kind of remarks, comments that you have here for this, then let us know. Another question, maybe a bit of a secret, and then maybe we'll get one or two from the chat if they promise to behave themselves.
Yeah, that's. No, I mean, to be honest, I think that the blog post was very well written, and I think it covered a lot of things. And I think that a lot of the questions that maybe I might have is moving forward. And I think a lot of the things in general that people are curious about are going to be things that are going to be addressed further down the line, right? As we've been saying, you keep on having a lot of oversight and everything, keep on continuously developing stuff, which again is really cool. Something I would be curious about and this is more of I guess of a kind of a personal thing, isn't completely with alliances, but after alliances is done, whenever that might be, what is kind of like the first priority for you guys? Because a lot of people I think are very concerned that alliances isn't going to fix world versus world, rightly so. There's a lot of other issues besides just population imbalance. So is there something that you're targeting directly after alliances is over? Is it kind of up in the air more? What are your thoughts? If you can answer, of course, if you can't, that's fine as well. Because I know this is more off topic and not so focused on wordless restructuring.
You complimented the blog, but I feel like you didn't read it.
Well,
I'm just giving you crap, dude. So after population balance is addressed, I think rewards, and I feel landing on rewards wasn't something that just like Raymond and I felt was the most important thing. Like we spent a lot of time talking to players. There's a lot of guild leaders and commanders we've been chatting with. There's a server that we've been invited to, which has been super helpful, getting perspective from all those folks. I spent a lot of time running in game. Obviously look at the analytics and stuff as well. And rewards just seems like the right answer. A lot of players feel that the current reward systems are under rewarding, and I totally get that. It doesn't feel profitable to be a world versus world player, and then winning doesn't matter. So I think trying to resolve those two issues is going to be pretty big for the game mode. Like I mentioned before, I think from there, we expect that there'll be some shifts in the way that the game is played. And I think the big question is whether or not those shifts are going to be healthy for the game mode. And so we need to be able to react to what we're seeing and make sure that it still aligns with our vision for the game mode. And so I mentioned it's a blog post, but really every lever that we have in World vs. World is on the table to be changed to make sure that we're actually delivering that experience. And so everything from the value of capping an objective to how tactivators work or how upgrades work, right? Like everything is something that can be tweaked to make sure that we're actually delivering the right experience that we need to. And so at that point, we're really going to be focused on iterating on the existing systems to make sure that we've once we've addressed population and rewards, that it actually is delivering what we envision for the mode. From there, it gets a lot more vague, honestly, and I think that's really exciting because I think we're going to see a whole brand new set of problems that are going to crop up at that point. But the thing that we will have this time around is a team of folks that are dedicated to World vs. World that can actually solve those problems or address those problems. And that'll just really be prioritized based on what we actually think the biggest issues are going to be at that point, right? So it's hard to really telegraph like that far down the road, or sorry, to forecast that far down the road. But I'm actually looking forward to understanding what the new problems are at that point, because hopefully we've addressed everything that came before it.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. Like, we say that our focus is world restructuring, but that does not mean that is the only thing that like we have to wait for world restructuring to come out and be finished before anything else happens with the game mode, right? It is where we're gonna like that's more an indication of like how we're going to address our priorities, right? If it is the question of like does world restructuring get what it needs or something else, right? Like it will probably be that world restructuring gets what it needs, but like it is not a feature that sucks up the entirety of the capacity of the studio, right? So there's opportunities for us to do more over time. What that is and when that stuff comes out, right? Like is hard, like Josh was saying, is hard to forecast. But yeah, I mean it's super exciting. Very excited for all this that's going on. And last thing, I mean, obviously, primary focus is the char car, right? Like that's
that's the answer I was looking for. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know. I'm trying to formulate my thought on this one, but I've been reading the reactions to the blog post we put out there initially, and like when we even confirmed that world restructuring is a thing, and there's I would say a healthy level of skepticism from folks, and I don't fault anyone for those reactions. I think that if you look at the things that we've done previously or how things have been handled, like I think we would all admit that there's been some mishandlings. Things definitely could have gone a bit better, especially on the communication front. And I think that I don't expect that we're going to win anyone over just by talking about these things. I think that we'll believe it when we see it is a healthy level of skepticism. But just know that we are dead set on winning you back. So I'm really excited for the future of the game mode. I'm excited for all the things we've kind of got on our list of things that we need to do. And all the other things we want to try to solve for the rest of the game, which is not today's conversation, obviously, but will probably be a topic sometime between now and EOD timeframe.
Ooh.
So I know I'm feeling really good about things. I feel
nice,
very hopeful.
Oh, I love to see it. And then in that regard, just for one final question here, you mentioned a few times, you don't want things to interfere with the vision. You want to maintain the vision of the game mode of what world versus world is. Could you tell us a little bit about what that actually is? Or maybe if it's easier, certain things that you don't want to see, right? Like certain behaviors, player patterns that you don't want to see happening.
That's a fun question. This is where it gets really tricky because the thing that I'm going to say is going to be dissected by every part of Wubba that doesn't agree with the thing that we're saying, right? And so now I am understanding why you're saving this question for last. So like I mentioned earlier, so I've been spending since I came back to the studio, and I was back at the studio before it was announced back in July. I've spent probably about 95% of my in-game time playing World vs. World just to try to better understand the mode and the problems that players are experiencing with it. And it's just really interesting spending time with different types of groups who play the game in different ways. So I've spent when I came back, I spent my time with the Fight Guild, who's got a really regular raid schedule. They play the same time every single week, and they're trying to improve. It's just really interesting seeing the problems that they have with the game mode and the conversations I have with them. I've done a lot of pugging, a lot of pugging with commanders who are just doing open tag stuff, which has been really interesting. Very different problems that they experience. PPT trains, karma trains, stuff like that. I've played a lot on Maguma, and Maguma's got is a whole world unto its own, which has been very interesting to understand. I've been trying to get. Last night I was playing with the Havoc Squad for the first time in a really long time, and they told me many times that it was more players that we were running with than they typically would. I feel like the fact that we had a 20-player squad that they were like offended by, but typically they run a much smaller squad and they try to do small scale stuff. But it's just interesting seeing all the different needs in the game mode, and so I think the future for the game mode is that we can continue to support those experiences for all the different player types. Like I don't think we want to fundamentally shift what the game mode is and make it into something that it isn't today. I think it's just trying to find ways to better serve those players and those communities with the tools that we have at our disposal. Now, if we start to see really emerging gameplay where like boon blobbing is the only viable strategy in the game mode, like that would be a problem. I think there needs to be a place for all of these different kind of variants of gameplay within the new structure. And so what that actually means is really going to depend on how it all shakes out. But we don't want to shift things too dramatically, I guess is the point. I would be very sad if there was a world where Havoc was no longer viable, or boon blobbing was the only thing that made sense, or if only roaming was the thing, and it was just 100 rangers on map every single day. Like that's just my actual nightmare. So I think we want to try to avoid all those scenarios, and just have it be a better version of what we had today.
One man's nightmare is another man's fantasy, but
that's true.
I did roll Core Ranger just to understand it. Actually, when I started playing on Maguma, like the application was like, "Do you have a thief or a Core Ranger to play? If not, please don't come here." So I had to roll one just to be a part of Maguma.
Yeah, I mean that's conclusive evidence it's not a server you'd want to play on. But yeah, absolutely.
Oh, goodness me. Well, that's a good answer. I think that was definitely a good answer. I think that's a good way to put it. We want a lot of variety in different play styles, and hopefully not to completely skew it one way or the other, which will of course be kept an eye on as things develop over time. But all right then, come on then, chat. All right, you guys we've got a little while here. We've got like another 10 minutes or so. So like, if you guys think we haven't addressed anything, and hello chat, listen to me very carefully. Don't ask us about something that's not to do with world versus world alliances and world restructuring.
Hi, GBG. Hi.
Yeah. You can't.
I'm gonna pull one out of the chat right away.
Oh yeah, let's go.
So the question was, if you have 300 people in your guild and only 100 people select it as their battle guild, does it count for 300 or 100? It would count for 100, right? And that's not even quite right because it's 100 like scaled by like their playtime in World versus World, right? So that's what that would be. Like within your alliance, if like it would be just the number of people that are actually in the alliance. It's we're like that's the whole point of picking your battle guild is because you're in 5 guilds, right? Like so how do we determine, like, do you count as one person for all 5 of those guilds? No, you're only going to get placed with one, so you would only count for the one that you select, right? So yeah, you don't have to worry about that. Like it's PVX guilds that have a core of WoW players, like you're not going to count as like a huge block. It's just going to be the people that play.
Okay.
There's a fun question in chat, if you don't mind. I'm pulling them now.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, I'm looking.
It's a free for all.
Yeah,
well, as you already said, I can't
let's
read,
go
so you should probably do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a comment in chat about like regular balance when. This is something we touched on in the blog post very briefly, and I think it's a really good question. I got into Guild Wars because I'm a very competitive gamer. I love I love dunking on other people, and for anyone who enjoys that kind of thing, profession balance is a constant conversation. And I do think that regular ongoing updates for balance is really important for the future of the game. Our current plan right now, a lot of my time is spent focusing on what we're going to be doing after End of Dragons launches. For anyone who's not familiar, like I'm the head of live ops for Guild Wars 2, so the live game is really my wheelhouse. So things like PvP and fractals and living story and balance are all things that I care deeply about. And balance is a huge component of that. And so going into next year, we will have dedicated resources that'll be working on balance and will not be distracted by other things. Right now we've got a team the team that's working on balance is also the team that's working on elite specs. And so right now we really need them to focus in on making elite specs great. And every moment of time that they can spend invested in that area is just going to be much better for the release of End of Dragons and for all of you. But we're going to look to resolve that problem next year. So I think that we can look to a much more consistent cadence for balance after EOD launches. We're still trying to address problems as they crop up between now and EOD, of course. But they won't be really the size. This is just I'm being pretty open about this. They just won't be the size of patches that I think that you're looking forward to. Those things will come after EOD launches, right? For now, it's going to mostly be maintenance and looking to address things that are problematic, and then we'll get into the real cadence next year.
Cool.
Okay, let's see if we've got anything else here. A lot of these kind of come down to the same thing. Like if you look at the blog, but again, right, for people who are asking about stuff like what are you going to do about other systems like Siege and other systems like maybe PPK becomes really bad and everyone just running around PPTing all the time. Guys, this is talked about in the blog post. Go and read it. Someone link it real quick.
Anyways?
Link it.
Well,
okay.
I have one thing we mentioned on that front. So I think there are some interesting. There's a lot of levers there that are really interesting, right? That we could pull, and I don't think that these things are necessarily need to wait until we get to post rewards to address. Like I think there's a lot of. This is actually the problem of putting a roadmap out there. Is it kind of sounds like we won't get to anything until we've completed the previous phase. That's not always going to be true. There are tweaks and changes that we can make in previous phases, right? So, like I mentioned before, rewards. We know that skirmish tracks take too long to complete right now. Like it requires too much of a time investment. That's a thing that we could address much more in the near future, as opposed to like adding in brand new leaderboards or whatever the eventual rewards mechanism might look like, right? So we can do iteration on existing systems while we're working on things like alliances. It just may not be to the volume that we'd like, but we can still do some level of work there. I think Siege is a really interesting space for us. Like talking to all these different player groups I mentioned before, everyone's got a different take on how Siege should work. Either Siege should be buffed, and I know that even just saying that, people are chatting like, "What?" They're throwing the what faces. Like, why would you buff Siege? A lot of people are like, you should just remove Siege from the game. And so I think that things like bonus events are actually a really interesting way for us to experiment with changes to Siege. Like basically for a week long, we're going to make X, Y, and Z changes to Siege. Let's see how it affects the game. And then from there, we can decide which one of those things that we actually want to incorporate long term. I would love to get into a mode where we are just testing and iterating much more frequently. It might mean that things are shifting more frequently in World vs. World, which I think some people will probably bristle at the idea of. But I don't want to get in I don't want to get in a situation where we're shipping a change and then never revisiting it. I'd love to be much more iterative on these kind of things.
Okay. Would that? I can't believe how many people are asking about this. Actually, like, are there any plans to look at Edge of the Mists in the future and make it maybe more relevant?
Why
more
would you?
important?
Why would you feed them, Teapot?
Yeah. Well, look, I'm sorry. Like, they keep asking. Like, they're persistent.
No one cares about those players.
Yeah.
They're relevant.
So, Edge of the Mist is kind of an interesting scenario, right? Like, because it in its present form, it's not world versus world, right? And so a lot of the questions we get asked is like, hey, can we get the pip system into Edge of the Mist? Can Edge of the Mist count, toward world versus world somehow, right? And with the way that it exists right now, a lot of those, kind of questions, like they're hard to answer, right? Like, you're playing on green team in Edge of the Mist. Like, how do we determine like what place you're in for for pips and stuff like that, right? Not unsolvable questions, but something that is not immediately obvious. That like we need someone to actually take a think and look deep into those kind of questions. So right now, I don't think we don't have any active plans for Edge of the Mist, but it is. I mean, it's a thing that's sitting there. So it's not something that is out of the realm of possibilities, but like, I mean, we want to focus on the core game mode of world versus world, right? And so that's where our efforts are gonna be focused.
Yep. 100% what Raymond said. Spending any time on EOTM right now would be time that we're not spending on fixing the core game mode. This is just the reality. Like, we have finite resources as developers. We need to try to figure out the best place to apply those to get the outcome that we're looking for. And so, EOTM was originally implemented as like a solution for queues, right? It was a thing for players to go do while there were queues that were active. This could become a bigger problem when we have world restructuring. Could become a smaller problem. We don't know quite yet. So it's one of those pieces that we'll evaluate when we've got more data.
Okay. Are there any plans to enhance the abilities that commanders have to lead their squads, potentially even without voice? Like certain different markers to say, hey, go push over there. Hey, use all your abilities here. Stuff like that.
What about in-game comms?
Yeah, well, let's not do that.
Great for PvP.
In-game comms is a big like, I mean, that's a huge tech problem, right? Like, that's not simple, right? It's very simple. It's one of those things that's very simple to say, and it is very hard to get right. As I'm sure many people who have seen in-game comms in other games can attest to.
And that's the
from
only
a game
issue with them.
direction standpoint, like, also not a thing that we're super keen on. Technical limitations, constraints aside, I'm not entirely convinced that voice chat would be a good addition to the game at this juncture.
Huh. I wonder why. I'm sorry, I derailed. Please.
No, but you did have a good question around in-game tools for commanders. To be super upfront with this, like, we don't have a plan for it right now, right? Like, again, this is about trying to put our attention towards the core problems we have in front of us right at the very moment. But I have been playing a lot with type commanders, I think is what we call them. Basically commanders that do nothing but, what's it?
Text commanders?
Chatmanders? Chatmanders. Okay,
Yeah,
Chatmanders. Okay, I like that better. I like that better than Typemander. So I've been playing a lot of Chatmanders lately, and it's amazing how effective a lot of them are. In fact, I've been in like better run squads, but with some Chatmanders than I have with like jumping into Discord. It's actually amazing. And talking with those folks, like, there are a lot of things that would make their lives a lot easier. Like right now, if you watch like a Chatmander through the world, like, they're pausing, they're stopping to type, and then they start moving again. And so I think there's a lot of tools that we could provide them to make their lives a little bit easier and to make to reduce the burden on out of game communication. I think those are certainly the things we'd like to look into, but those are further down the list than pretty much everything else we talked about for the near term.
Absolutely. And then maybe one final one, unless you guys have spied anything in particular in the chat. With the renewed focus on guilds and players maybe wanting to be in a lot of guilds for different alliances and so on, would there be any plans on expanding the 5 guild cap that is currently in place for players?
Please.
Man, I thought we were going to get through this whole stream without that one.
Unlucky.
Yeah, so I'll throw the mic over to Raymond in a second, but I have been chatting with some folks about this. I know it's something that's coming up, and I know that folks would really like for us to add. I don't think it's going to be in there for the betas. I think folks might have to make some hard decisions for the betas, but it is a thing that we'd like to try to tackle. It's definitely a longer term thing for us, though. the guild limit being 5 wasn't an arbitrary choice at the game's launch, right? And so there's some technical issues that we need to work through on that front, but it's certainly something that we'd like to do, and we understand that there's a lot of value in that, and that a lot of folks really feel like they'd have to make a lot of hard decisions in terms of which guilds to stick around with in the new alliances system.
Yeah,
Right.
I 100% agree with Josh. It's something that we looked into, or that I looked into, a long time ago. But it's an additional guild slot is not a WoW change, right? It is a whole game change, right? Like that is a difference that is a thing that affects every player. And so it's something we've got to think about, holistically in the game, right? Like, is this going to be a problem elsewhere because it's actually going to affect other things, right? And so yeah, like and for the beta, right, like not having alliances kind of puts a bigger strain on this, because the only thing you have is your guilds. But once alliances are in, right, like I think the weight of this is going to be lessened, right? Because you're going to have the ability to form multiple guilds together and effectively be that 6th guild, right? Like that alliance sort of becomes that 6th guild that you're a part of. Speaking of alliances, there was a thing that I pulled out. There was a question about alliances and being near cap, right? Like we've got 450 people in our alliance and 2 guilds try to recruit a bunch of people. That's definitely a problem that we've recognized, and we've got ideas on how we address that, but like that's one of those things that we're going to be looking to the community to help us, what is the right solution to this problem, right? Because there's a lot of things there's a lot of ways to address a situation like that aren't that have pros and cons, right? And we want to make sure that we're selecting from the right kind of stuff. So I don't have a real good answer for that, but like it is definitely something we're thinking about, because it's kind of a big thing.
Absolutely. And oh yeah, sorry. Wait, were you going to say something?
Sorry, I just keep chat's going to go on forever, so at some point you should just tell us to stop. But there was a question about feedback and how we're collecting that for the betas. So the forums are our official. They're the official repository for feedback, right? And so if you ever ask me, I'm going to tell you, hey, you should go on the forums to provide that feedback, because that's the place where we can actually, it's kind of all in the same place, and we can kind of peruse it at our own leisure, right? But I will say that we're looking everywhere. We look at Reddit, we look at Discord. We're talking to a lot of folks in and out of game. There's a huge reliance on data here. We've got a lot of basically everything you do in game is tracked. It sounds a little bit big brothery, but that's super helpful for us to identify where the problems are, and then the feedback that we see from players helps contextualize that data, right? Like we need to apply meaning to that data that we're seeing. And so we're having a lot of chats with commanders and with guild leaders. I think I'm having conversations with folks that are just in game. Whenever I play WoW, which is pretty frequently these days, I tag up. In fact, sometimes I even command, which is not great for anyone. And we have a lot of great conversations there too. So I think for most folks, going on the forums, spread that feedback there. If you're in a larger guild, I would definitely recommend you provide that feedback to your guild leader. There's a good chance that they're probably involved in the guild leader community who can help make that information available to Ray and I. So yeah, forums is the default, but we're definitely looking in many, many more places than just that.
Okay, that seems like a very, very a good thing to do, guys. Get on those forums, take over the forums. Okay, be the change you want to see. Okay, convert them from what you guys perceive them to be to something glorious there later on.
Wonderful place.
Yeah, and okay, I think we can kind of wrap up with this one here as well. This is a good place to stop here. If you claim, say, a keep right now, it will claim for your guild. Would that be extended to alliances, for example? Will you now claim for your alliance, or will you still claim with your guild?
Unknown.
Yeah, unknown. That's a big change. That's a big change. That's implying a lot of things, like an alliance progression system, all sorts of fun stuff. So if that was cool for the game mode, we thought it was a really good change. Like that's something we could certainly do down the road, but I don't have any feedback for them besides cool idea. Maybe someday, who knows? Okay,
awesome. In that case, on that alliance progression system, sounds very cool indeed. On that note, thank you guys so much, gentlemen. I really appreciate you hopping on board. I think it is awesome. to have this level of communication, direct contact between the players and the developers of the game. So thank you guys so much for taking time out of your busy schedules, busy making an expansion, no big deal or anything like that. Okay, but we really appreciate it. Everyone in the chat really appreciates it. And obviously, Roy, thanks for helping me out here, okay, and extracting the truth, okay, from our wonderful developers, Grouch and Ray here. Thank you guys very much.
I was mostly a punching bag for Grouch, but yeah, no problem.
What are you talking about?
I just echo that.
Can't sign up on that, man. That's rough.
Yeah, I'm not going to.
I think you didn't drink all your water, Roy.
It was really great. Yes, I'm not experiencing the same level of thirst as some other people may have in the past, but I think this is really cool. I know that a lot of World versus World players have probably been a little bit disenfranchised with things in the past. And, myself included in that. I think that obviously alliances were announced a long time ago. I have said many times that I didn't even think they were ever coming. And obviously I was very clearly proven wrong. And that's awesome. I have a lot of hope, unironically, for the future moving forward. And I think this is a really good sign of it. I think that it's awesome. Again, keep on saying it. The way you guys are trying to implement alliances is really cool. And what Grouch just said about getting feedback out there, through whatever it is you want. Unironically, you can feel however you want about the system. You can be a doubter if you want, or a believer, whatever. Get the feedback out however you can. Let them know how you feel about the beta. Let them know how you feel about other things, because clearly they're watching. Clearly they're communicating a lot. ArenaNet is trying, so now we have to try as well. And alliances are a very, players have more control over what they can do, right? So let's not abuse that. Let's actually, be responsible a little bit and do good things with this system. But yes, thank you very much, Ray and Grouch, for coming. It's awesome to have you guys come and talk to us. I know chat really appreciated it as well. So hope you guys have a great rest of your day. This is a good test run, I felt. I'm going to wait and see what the feedback is internally afterwards, but I feel like it went pretty well. Yeah. I was joking with Teapot before the stream started, but I tuned to his stream right before this kicked off, and he's like, all right, chat, we need to be respectful. No frogs. Don't yell at them. Let's not, this is our big shot. We're going to have them on stream. If we ruin this, it's we're going to miss big missed opportunity. And it actually got my anxiety spiked up. Oh my goodness, he's doing the pep talk with them before the stream. This is going to go awful. You should have seen the things he was telling me. It worked, right? It worked out pretty well. Yeah, my strategy was just to not actually look at chat, and I think it worked out great. There you go. They were very well behaved. I'm glad. I believe you. I believe you. Good. I am very, very happy to see that. I'd love to see it. Okay. All right. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Yeah, 100%. Yes. If of course, Grouch and Ray, if you guys have any final words, final thoughts you want to kind of do that, then we can go ahead and quickly wrap up. But I can only echo Roy. It's awesome to have this. Okay, I think it's a really, really big step forwards in kind of building up trust and a good relationship between the studio and the player base. I think, well, I would say this, but I think it's going to do a lot of good, and I can't wait to see what. Yeah, I mean, yeah, guys. Exclamation GW2 in the chat. Buy the game using my referral link. Come on, let's go. Yeah. I wish I could ultimate say the edition. Same. The ultimate edition. But you're an ArenaNet partner. You can say that. Yeah, but I don't have a Twitch. Well, yeah. You do. Yeah. You don't get a link, dude. Yeah. Sorry, Roy. Sorry, man. Are you though? No. Join ArenaNet Raymond and Grouch and Teapot and Roy. Who? I'm not salty. I swear. Sorry, man. Sorry, dude. Really appreciate being here. This is really fun. And final thought is, I'm still working the point blank kata on unbreakable wall strategy. I think it's gonna work. I think it's a thing. It was a good idea. It was a good idea to get that in because Ben says he was going to ask you about that if you didn't bring it up. So there it is. Yeah. That's good. Oh, he is here. That's the new meta, I think. You know what, Ray? Watch out. You don't need to worry about Ben. He's been playing staff LE since the release, and that was it hasn't been meta in years. So don't worry about him. You keep doing your thing. I don't mind. I never claimed to be good at the game. That's I can make the game. I don't know that I can play it. Oh, quick last minute question from I don't think you guys will have heard of this guy. CMCGW2 says, Ray, when are you bringing back the World versus World streams?
I mean, honestly, like it's a stream. Doing the streams remotely is a lot of work, right? And we're I don't know, some of us are a little bit busy. I really hope that we can get back to doing them. I think they were a load of fun. It was a really good touch point with the community. We got to play with a lot of really cool people, so I think that's something that I would love to bring back. And now we've got Josh, so there can be another person that we make fun of how they play the game, and not just me. So
I'm thinking it's time to put the chains back on CMC. That's my takeaway from that question.
Like who gave him internet access again? That's what I want to know.
You heard it here first, but I think we might be seeing a little bit more from CMC tomorrow with some elite specializations. But anyway, on that note of CMC being sent back to prison, thank you guys so much for watching. Once again, big shout out here to Grouch and Ray for hopping on board here. We really hope you guys enjoyed the show out there in the chat. It was awesome. A whole lot of fun there as well. Leave your comments, leave your feedback, and let's see if we can, really help out here, make World versus World the cornerstone game mode that it truly deserves to be. Thanks, guys. We'll see you later.